Hello, beautiful souls, and welcome to the Woo Curious podcast. Your map to the mystical, your key to the sacred, and your guide back home to yourself. I'm Eileen, a writer, a spiritual coach, energy healer, and slow living witch. This podcast is your invitation to explore a world where the mundane and the sacred intertwine. It's a haven for those ready to take the first steps into the realms of magic and mystery, providing a safe space for you to embark on your own enchanted journey towards healing and self-discovery. Here, I'll unveil the whispers of the mystical, the rituals often hidden in plain sight, and I'll engage in sacred conversation intended to stir your soul and lead you back into your power. I'm all about demystifying woo and witchcraft. So, whether you're a seasoned seeker or simply woo curious, I'm so delighted you've decided to join me on this journey. Let's make magic. Hey Woo Crew, before we drop into today's episode, I wanted to take a moment to invite you to a free workshop that I'm offering on January 14th at 1 p.m. Mountain Standard Time. How we begin is so important. How we begin our days, our weeks, our months, and our years sets the tone for our lives. And while each and every day is a new beginning, there is an extra potency in the new calendar year that we can harness. And one of the most powerful practices in my life has been rediscovering the sacred in all the mundane aspects of life. Doing this has allowed me to re-imbue my world with meaning and magic and has truly been life-changing. And I can't possibly keep all this wonder to myself, and so I am inviting you to join me for a Sacred Start workshop. I designed this workshop to help you create a sacred start to your year through daily ritual so that you can move through 2025 with intention and clarity. The workshop will be recorded, of course, for anyone who is unable to attend live, and as an added bonus, you can upgrade your experience to include a guided journey to connect with your animal and plant allies for 2025. This process connects you more deeply with the wisdom and support offered to you by the more than human world. I hope to see you there. I hope you'll join me. As always, the link for the Sacred Start workshop on January 14th at 1 p.m. Mountain Standard is linked below in the show notes. Hello, and welcome back, Woo Crew, to another episode of the Woo Curious podcast. I am your host, Eileen, and I am here today with a guest. Her name is Megan Edge. I'm so excited to have Megan on. She has been helping people via her counseling services with a focus on empowerment and deep healing of emotional, energetic, and physical trauma since 2007. She has 3 decades of study in the metaphysical fields of astral projection, runestones, dream work, tarot. There's a whole bunch more. I'm not going to read them all. She has all the certifications along with degrees in social work, women's studies, and geology. And she has been named a master healer. She's also a generational forager, which I love. I'm really excited to talk about foraging and plants. And she's been ethically harvesting from the forest since a child. And now through her shop, Beyond the Garden Gate, she shares Mother Nature's healing bounty with her teas, salves, and tinctures. And last but not least, she's also the creator of the Heart's Journey Healing Hearts Oracle Cards and Guidebook, which we're going to have a special link for you below to purchase those with a Woo Crew discount, and also be doing a giveaway on Instagram over the coming week if you want to get your hands on a copy of those. So, Megan, without further ado, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for inviting me on. I'm really looking forward to our conversation.
Me too. So, as I mentioned before we dropped into record, I like to start these conversations off with a question about your own spiritual journey and what led you to the work you do. For listeners, they'll know that I was an atheist not that long ago and have kind of come full circle and I'm now doing this work. And so I'm always curious when my guests come on what their journeys have looked like into this spiritual world and helping people in this world.
Well, I feel that I'm really fortunate in that I come from a family where we were always curious about spirituality, about things beyond what is right in front of us. I had two sides of that. My father was a journalist and a newspaper publisher. So, a reporter, a researcher, he always considered himself to be very science based, except that he would hug a tree every once in a while. He would
There's
have,
signs for that.
that's true. That's true. There is now. He'd have these profound experiences when he was out hunting. In fact, he stopped hunting when I was a young girl because of a very deeply spiritual experience he had, that he had shot with an arrow. So every once in a while he would tell me these little stories, these glimpses into his more metaphysical or esoteric side. And then my mother, she was very much about dreaming and what's behind the veil, and she would talk about the fae. And she always told me
Mm.
when I was little, "You've got the fae," which means you've got a connection to the fairy world,
Hmm.
whatever that is and however we perceive that. So I grew up with an acceptance of, kind of a non-questioning acceptance of the fact that there is so much more to our experience than what is necessarily right in front of us. And that sometimes things we cannot touch or see or understand from a science background or a practical perspective can be some of the most profound ways of knowing about our world and what's around it.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, that's beautiful. I love that kind of almost dichotomy of your parents, the way that they overtly, at least, moved in the world, but
Mhm.
that connection to that depth and that something more. And I think that you're touching on that piece of wisdom that we're starting to see become a little bit more, like, I don't want to say mainstream yet, but more openly talked about, that science doesn't have all the answers and that there are valid ways of knowing
Mhm.
beyond those like cold hard facts, as it will.
Yes, and one of my biggest influences was when I was in university and starting my geology degree, and I had this fabulous professor, Dr. Schenk, and he was my sedimentology professor. For those of you who don't, sedimentology is the study of the layers of sediment as they are put down over time, over deep geologic time and more recent time. In the very first day of classes, he said to this classroom full of first year students. I wasn't a first year student at that point. I was a third year student because I was doing a women's studies degree at the same time as I started my geology degree. And he said to all of these bright eyed, just got out of high school kids, he said, "I don't want you to take anything that you have already learned or anything you're going to learn here as a cold, hard fact, because there are no cold, hard facts. This is all theoretical. We're
Mhm.
theorizing about what happened. We can see the sediment. We can see that there's clay and there's, shale and there's other rocks underneath it. But the how is still a theory." And he said, "I want you to question everything." And I knew I had found a mentor in that
Mm. Yeah, the best teachers are those that call us to question everything. I'm reminded of a religious studies teacher that I loved. The poor man was not loved by most of his students
moment. Dear.
because he was a really hard marker, and he was definitely eccentric. But I was fascinated by the way that his brain worked and his way of questioning things and of like pushing back on traditional academia, and that same idea. I took an introduction to Islam with him, and I remember that first day him being like, this is the book that we had was called A History of Islam. And he was like,
Mm.
it's really important that we remember that all histories are simply a history. There's no the history, because it's so tinted by whoever's writing it, their own background, their biases, their knowledge, who got to put the words down, who gets to speak about their knowings and their truths, as it were.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And I similarly, I did a comparative religions course when I was in university and had a professor sounds very much like yours. And he said very similar things. And he also said, think about what religion is. It is a belief system.
Mhm.
And there is unquestioning belief, and then there is the questioning belief. And the Jewish tradition is very much a questioning belief. There's lots of conversation about what is it mean, like what does it mean, what did God mean, what did Yahweh mean. There's debate about that. And then in some of our Christian sects, there's no debate. It is just what that portion of the Bible, that's what it says, so that's what it is. There's only one interpretation. And what I
Mm-hmm.
loved about his approach to that idea that religion is a belief system, he said, so science is also a religion.
Mm.
And I can watch the science students going, what? And by definition, it is. And when we look at
Yeah.
science as what is taken as cold hard fact, but what in fact is not, because it's all subject to interpretation, to perspective, to who is looking at the data, who is looking at the results, how are they interpreting it, and then the blind allegiance, we get a religion.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure we do. Yeah, it's very interesting. Well, and the best scientists are always the ones who say, we don't have facts, as your geology teacher said. They're
Mhm.
all, even gravity is a theory.
That's right.
Right? You can never prove a theory, you can only disprove. And so there is a lot of things that we take for granted as truth,
Mhm.
which we have lots of evidence to say, like, yeah, this is probably true. And
Mhm.
there's always that space for something unknown to us to come in and impact what we know to be true. And this happens all the time, especially as our scientific tools become more sensitive, as we become able to measure things that we weren't able to measure before. I feel
Mhm.
like I entered onto the woo scene just as neuroscience was starting to be like, oh, all these people are not actually crazy. Look at it. We have science to support. We have double blind randomized control trials showing that Reiki works. And it's like, it's still sometimes my brain's like, but does it really? I practice energy medicine and I still sometimes I'm like, but does it really? Because of that conditioning.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Well, I remember having a conversation with somebody in an audience that I was giving a talk to about energy healing and chakras and auras and just our whole energy field. And he put up his hand and he said, I don't believe in energy. And I said, huh, do you believe in the wind? And he says, well, yes. I said, do you believe in cell phones? Well, yes. Well, how do they work? You can't see it. I mean, you can feel the wind, but the feeling of the wind is the result of the wind. You're not actually feeling the wind, right?
Mhm.
You're feeling the pressure from the wind. You can't taste it. You can't
Mhm.
see it, but you believe in it. So why would you make a statement like, I don't believe in energy?
Mhm.
It was so fascinating. And then from there, we had a really great conversation. But just that statement, I don't believe in. And then that got me also thinking, well, okay, you don't believe in, but that doesn't make it not real or not true. It's
Yeah.
just that you don't want to have the experience of it, or somehow the experience of it is contrary and might make you question other things if you chose to believe in it. But whether you believe in it or not is irrelevant to its existence.
Oh, yeah, totally. Totally. I think there's like this, like a discomfort with that, which we cannot grasp or feel or like that sense of the immaterial world
Hmm.
is uncomfortable for a lot of people because again we've been really saturated for centuries now in a culture that values the rational, the logical above the sensory, the felt, the intuitive experience.
Yes.
And because we have the media hyping up the divides and the you have to pick a side and there must be a truth, and it's, yeah, there's so many factors that play into that.
Hmm.
And then the fear of judgment. If I say I believe in something that my peers don't believe in,
Right.
do I lose that connection or that community group? The safety net of being a human is our collectives.
Absolutely. And it really is profound. And while we can look at our culture today and the opportunities that we have to create community or be in community or move from community to community, that isn't always true. Culturally in the past and certainly in some cultures today, it's not. And
Mhm.
so that threat of being removed from your community, being ostracized, is still something that is deeply ingrained in us. And we see it on social media
Mhm.
all the time. I mean, the way that cancel culture works, and it's just so sudden that you are no
Mhm.
longer, you're no longer person welcome. You're now your person non grata. For the
Mhm.
slightest disagreement or different opinion, it's very real. And as you say, very discomforting.
Yeah, yeah, playing on that very biological, like, that's the neurobiology at play there, is that, "No, I need to survive, and to survive, I need to be included." And
Hmm.
that is the root of so many of our, not only our, the disbelief that we purport or cling to, but
Hmm.
also the way that we conform ourselves and contort ourselves to
Hmm.
fit into the box that we think will make us acceptable.
Yes, absolutely. And that it's been a theme in my life, and something that I've moved out of from being a child and into teenage and adulthood, was the worry and concern about, well, how does that person receiving me? What do they think about me? How am I doing? Okay,
Mhm.
am I getting noticed? And I remember having a very profound experience where I came to this realization, this understanding that I don't need to get noticed. I can just show up and let myself be seen, and I can allow other people to have their experience of me. And what that is actually none of my business, nor does it really have an awful lot to do with me. It has to do
Mhm.
with them and what their expectations are and what their judgments are and what their experiences are. And so if I can, in a healthy way, disconnect from the need to know how someone feels about me or why they feel about me in a particular way, I can move through my life in a very different manner than if I'm hooked into needing to know how other people are experiencing me.
Yeah, yes, I feel like that is, maybe the, like, kernel at the center of so much of the work that I've done personally, and I'm sure you have, done and now share with your clients as
Hmm.
well, is that that trusting that when we are able to show up and just be ourselves, that yes, we might lose the kinship or the friendship of some folks around us, but the
Hmm.
ones that are now able to see our true self and like, basically, this is very uneloquent way of saying, we call in those that are aligned with us, who see us for our whole selves, who love us for our whole selves. It allows for people to come together without those masks and without
Hmm.
those facades, and so it's like you can find your true kin in the world when you show up as all of you. But if you're hiding
Yeah,
or masking or worried, like, "Oh, they won't like me, so I better behave this way," you might keep some more connections, but those connections will never be really fulfilling in the same way.
which is so true. And we've seen that over the last 5 years. We've seen the need to be part of the group or the tribe turned against the population in a way
Mhm.
to divide people. And we've seen how black and white some people are able to see the world and think about the world, so that there isn't any space between the concept or the perception of right and wrong, to allow for any kind of conversation or critical thinking
Mhm.
in the choices that are being made around what they believe to be true. And I certainly, over the last 5 years, I've lost friends, I've lost family, I've lost connection, and at the same time, I've also built family, and I've built connection, and I've built community of perhaps more like-minded or aligned people. Without the circumstances of the last 5 years, I may have maintained some of those old friendships, but like you say, where is necessarily the depth? Um,
Yeah.
because those opportunities to learn about each other in a different way hadn't presented themselves yet
Mhm.
until these last 5 years.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, I feel the same way. It's almost as though the people that I've connected with in the last few, for me, it's more like the last 3 years, there is this safety and this curiosity that's mutual curiosity that feels really I have no words today, apparently. It just feels really safe. It feels really good. I have found a distance between myself and old friends that
Mhm.
that is painful for sure,
Mhm.
because they walked with me through significant parts of my journey, and there was a real depth and closeness there. And as I shifted and changed, they loved the version of me from before and aren't able to love the version of me fully that I am becoming. It's almost as though there's no space for that relationship to
Mhm.
shift and change and grow. And I
Mhm.
think part of that, especially among women, is we have very few examples of how friendships change over time if we allow them to, like how to navigate the shifting tides of our lives together in a way that allows us to stay connected. I think it's often easier to simply kind of drift apart.
It's true. The whole experience of breaking up with a friend is very, very different than breaking up with a, partner, a spouse, a boyfriend,
Yeah.
girlfriend. There's a different level to it.
Mm-hmm.
And like you say, sometimes it is easier just to allow that relationship to naturally go in whatever direction it's going to go in. And if we had examples of what it could be like to sit down and have a frank conversation, an honest conversation with the people around us, that would be very different.
Mm-hmm.
We really we aren't taught that. And then that whole concept of change comes into play, where we get really comfortable with our lives and the people in our lives, and when change shows up, we're not happy about it.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
we try to pull everything back to what we know and what we see as being comfortable for us, never
Mm-hmm.
mind of whether it's healthy or not, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. It comes back to that neurobiology of
Yeah,
like, ooh, change is scary. It's
yeah,
unknown. We'll just stay in this comfortable, though maybe not terribly comfortable, but
that's
safe,
it.
safe place.
Yeah.
And that change being really scary.
Well, and we can become very comfortable in our discomfort. And I see this often with my clients. They will tell the same story to whomever will listen to it over and over and over again, because they're
Mm-hmm.
comfortable with the way in which that story is being told, and they're comfortable with
Mm-hmm.
the way that it defines them, even though
Mm-hmm.
they come to someone like myself to say, oh my gosh, I'm so unhappy, I've tried everything, I don't know what to do next. Well, let's listen to your story, and then let's see if we can change the way in which you're telling your story. Let's see if we can heal the relationship that you have with your story. And it's going to be uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Redefining ourselves is uncomfortable. Transformation is uncomfortable. Usually by the time someone gets to me, they're pretty ready to do it
Right.
because they've tried
Yeah.
everything else.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Rewriting the story is powerful. And it's, again, like you said, that it's something that we are not taught so much. Like, I remember coming into this world of coaching and healing, and I didn't even know what a life coach was 5 years ago.
Mhm.
Like, never even heard of one. And so the things that I've learned since embarking onto my coaching training and then my
Mhm.
healers training, it all feels like these really foundational life skills for self exploration and growth and the ability to navigate relationships with so much more compassion.
Mhm.
It just feels like such a nicer way of being in the world, and yet it's not the typical way of being in the world because we're not taught these skills. Like, they should be part of kindergarten.
They should be part of kindergarten. They should be part of it all the way through. And
Yeah.
sadly, in our education system now, critical thinking, debate, and conversation are no longer encouraged.
Yeah.
And I watched my daughters go through their schooling, and I had such a disappointment that they weren't learning a variety of different things. They weren't learning a variety of different perspectives. They were being given
Mhm.
a perspective. This is the history, not a history.
Mhm.
This is
Mhm.
the way, not a way. And
Mhm.
they recognized it because they've often said to me that they feel that they did not receive a well-rounded education. They
Mhm.
learned to question things because of me, and they learned a lot of things that from watching documentaries, from asking to know things that they were no longer receiving in school. And I remember receiving some of those things in school, especially
Yeah.
university. The debate team. My
Yeah.
I don't think there's a debate team
I
anymore.
don't think there is either. I mean, there wasn't even when I was in in school, but I remember they were in movies.
I was on the debate team. I loved debating. And the whole concept of a debate team is that you are presented with a topic, you're given one side and then the other side, and
Yeah.
one team argues for this, and one team argues for this.
Yeah.
And it's not about being right. It's about presenting two different viewpoints, and then who can present it best
The
and
most
most
convincingly.
effectively and most
Yeah.
convincingly is the one who wins the debate. But you don't win the debate because you're right. You win the
Yeah.
debate because you're good at presenting the points that you're
Hmm.
presenting and getting the watchers to the audience to think about what it is that you're saying.
Yeah.
That's a skill that, I mean, just as I'm saying it out loud right now, I'd completely forgotten that I even was on the debate team. I'm so grateful I have that skill
Hmm.
that I learned. And
Yeah.
maybe I learned it as well, not maybe. I also learned it around the kitchen table because of the kinds of conversations that we would have between my journalist father and my, I don't know, altruistic mother.
Yeah.
Mother. But yes, that's it. We're just not taught it anymore. Society is not
Yeah.
taught these skills.
Yeah.
They're life skills. They're really important.
They are. I think that that piece of perspective too, I feel like this is going to be a beautiful lead in here to oracle cards because
Mm.
to me, when I think about using oracle and especially when I'm speaking about it to somebody who maybe is not very woo and is like, what are you doing? Are you going to read my future?
Right.
I tend to explain tarot and oracle as almost like a really good counselor who I can ask a question, I can pull a card, and I can receive a different perspective than I would be able to come up with from my limited vision of being in the soup.
Yes, I love that. I love that as a descriptor for how oracle cards and tarot cards can be helpful in that journey, the journey of life or the journey of healing. There's a lot of misconceptions about oracle card and tarot, more so tarot,
Mhm.
because there's a history between tarot and the church, the Christian
Mhm.
church, that in many cases the belief system is that using something like tarot is a tool that gets in the way between you and God, or you and the priest, because the priest is the go-between God and you, and
Right.
only he, and in some cases she, are able to give you that information. And then also, you should not be looking at your future because only God knows what your future is, and it's not up to you to question it. So there's a whole there's a whole history of
Mhm.
that relationship and belief, and that goes into a whole other conversation about religion. As we come out of that conversation, we can acknowledge that what an oracle card or a tarot card is it's a piece of paper. Right here it is. There's a piece of paper.
Mhm.
That's it. And on that piece of paper, there's a picture. In the
Mhm.
case of my cards, and there's a message on the back.
Mhm.
And you can read the message or not. You can look at the picture or not. Like it's all about choice as far as I'm concerned. Uh, if you choose to work with an oracle card, what you're doing is you're setting an intention. And in that moment of setting an intention, the intention being I seek guidance, you use a different part of your brain. You go into a slightly altered state of receptivity because you've said to your brain, I'm seeking an answer. I'm picking up this piece of paper. I'm allowing the image and I'm allowing the words to have meaning for me. And we'll see what happens from there.
Mm, mhm. I love that allowing,
Mm-hmm.
that piece. There's so many parts of the woo work. I'm gonna ask you in a second about how your process for creating this deck, but I just wanna touch on this because it made me think about e the way that even quote unquote non-believers in the more energetic realms and the woo and spiritual guidance, if those things don't resonate for you, there is so much power in our subconscious minds. And so, even if all you're doing is finding a way to bypass your conscious brain and tap into that wisdom that lives in our subconscious, like that's enough.
Mm-hmm.
That's
Mm-hmm.
enough. And a lot
Absolutely.
about, yeah, a lot is that allowing that suspension of disbelief
Mm-hmm.
in order to get deeper.
Absolutely. And what I always say to my clients, whether we're going into a card reading or an intuitive reading or we're going into a counseling session, is that they are never going to hear something they don't already know. They just might not know that they know it, But when we open
Mhm.
up to the subconscious and we go back into our memory banks, that's where all that information is held. And I say to them, it's your information. I'm not telling you
Mhm.
anything you don't already know on some level of awareness. I'm helping you access it by the conversation, by the words I'm choosing, by the perspective I'm offering you, and by a tool like an oracle card that gets us outside of ourselves and our monkey mind
Mhm.
and gives us the opportunity to see differently
Yeah.
about how we're seeing a situation or how we're seeing a belief or our circumstances. It just gives us a different perspective.
Yeah, for sure. I love that. So
Mhm.
what what was your process? What was your inspiration to create a deck? How did that come to you? How did you decide? I often think about how cool it would be to have an oracle deck, and then I'm like, I don't even know where I'd begin.
Well, first of all, I will start by saying I didn't believe it was possible that I could have an oracle deck in the
Mm,
beginning.
mhm,
I've worked with oracle and tarot and other kinds of tools for tapping into the subconscious forever, since I was a teenager, and I found my first bag of rune stones and thought, what are these? These are so
mm,
cool. And then I started collecting oracle card decks and working with them over the years. And when I started working with my clients, and I could see how profound their response could be to some of the messaging that would come through from the oracle cards that we were working with, in the back of my mind there was this little voice going, you could do this. You could make this. And I would say,
mhm.
absolutely not. Why? Who am I? What the height of arrogance? Who am I to make an oracle card deck when all of these really famous people are doing it, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I remember walking into a bookstore, one of our local bookstores, and there were tens of thousands of books. This bookstore was incredible. It was a secondhand bookstore. It was 4 stories in this old building downtown, just phenomenal. You could lose yourself in all the warrens of where these books were. And I
Mm,
stood there feeling completely overwhelmed at the hundreds of thousands of millions of books that are published every year that exist in the world. And I had that same refrain, who am I to write a book? And as I started to think that old tape, a new tape inserted itself into my cassette of my brain and said, who are you not to?
mhm, mhm,
Oh, oh. And then the conversation, the internal conversation went along the lines of, the way in which you see the world is different than anybody else's way of seeing the world. And there are people in the world who will benefit by the way in which you see and experience the world. They're waiting for you. They're waiting for your perspective, because that's the perspective that's going to be the key for them, the trigger for them for their healing. So if you really want to show up in the world as a healer, you better get your act together and get this thing done. That's kind of how it happened. So, the choice is always there. I could have said, no, I'm not going to. But at that point, I realized, if I'm going to walk my talk, I better get going on this. That was the conscious process. The the more the more esoteric process, I guess, or the more even metaphysical process, is that I had come to a place, more accurately, my then husband and I had come to a place in our lives together and in our marriage where it was not going well.
mm,
Many conversations hadn't happened that should have. Many conversations had happened but not been heeded. There were a lot of circumstances that were starting to pile up and pile up and pile up. And I was beginning to realize that I was profoundly and deeply unhappy.
mm,
And I didn't love the way that I was showing up in that relationship. I didn't love what I was allowing to be done to me from him. And
mhm,
that despite my many efforts and attempts and trying to find that voice to say, please stop what you're doing, it's hurting me, none of it was received on the other end, like on his side
mm,
of things. He,
mhm,
like we were talking about that whole thing about change. I was changing, I was growing, and I wanted to do that. And I wanted him to come with me. And he said to
mhm,
me one day at the kitchen tables, we were having one of these early conversations when we were looking at the dynamic of our relationship. He said to me, I can see that you're growing, and I know you want me to come with you, but I can't. I don't want to, and I don't know how. I don't want you to change. And that
mm,
he was very aware that that was what was happening for him. And he said, I don't. want you to change. And I said, I am changing. Like I'm not willing to just stay how I am for your comfort. And
Yeah.
then this very long drawn out process of a number of years as this all transpired. Along the way, I said to the universe, please just give me a sign. And when I see that sign, that symbol, I will know, I'll take that as a message that I'm following my heart above all other voices, and I'm making these changes in the best way I know how, with what I know right now in integrity. And immediately I started seeing hearts everywhere.
Mm.
Chris has a really good sense of humor. It's often laughing at us lovingly because we take ourselves so seriously. And so I started to photograph all these hearts. When I was given the idea of, you should do an oracle card deck, it could be helpful to other people. One of my questions to my higher self was, well, what? Like, what's the
Right.
theme, right? What's the theme?
Yeah.
And I heard hearts, dummy. It's hearts. All those photos you have of all those hearts you found in nature, those, hearts in clouds and hearts in the
Yeah.
trees and stones on the beach. There's a reason we've been giving you these. This is your theme. And the theme is about healing the heart, because when I found these hearts in nature, it was when I needed to see them, because
Hmm.
I was trying to follow my heart, because I knew that my choices were going to break a few hearts. But I also knew those choices had to be made in order to heal those hearts equally, mine as well as other people in the dynamic. I mean, when a couple breaks up or separates, it's not just about the two people, it's about all the people around them.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
children and family and parents and friends. It's a big deal, not
Hmm.
to be taken lightly or not to be done lightly in my view. And what I found lacking when I went looking for resources was something like this, was something that could help a person navigate their heart and their heart's wounds and their heart healing as they moved through their relationships, whether it's a spousal relationship or friendships or, sister, brother, or whatever it is. There wasn't anything like what I've created on the market at the time. There were lots of other amazing tools, but there wasn't this that was written from the perspective of a woman stepping out consciously from a relationship
Mm.
and providing help
Hmm.
and guidance and support for that process, right? There's lots of books out there about what it's like for the woman to be left by the man if it's a heterosexual relationship. There's lots of books out there about how to be a victim of that, like what that is to be in that circumstance. But what I wasn't finding on the bookshelves, this is 20 years ago, 15, 20 years ago, I wasn't finding books that were empowering a woman to make that kind of choice and decision in her life and move forward
Right.
with it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, that's beautiful. Thank you for sharing that process. I immediately am like, oh, I know a few people who need your deck.
Yeah.
'Cause-
So that's the emotional process that got me to the making of it. And then the practical making of it is a whole other journey.
right. Of
The
course.
writer's journey is a whole other conversation. But,
Yeah, yeah, and I'm sure we could have multiple multiple, conversations. I find this with so many of my guests that it feels like a snippet of the greater conversation that we could have together.
yeah.
And as we kind of move towards wrapping up, for folks who are listening who are making that connection with what you're saying and sharing, and obviously everything about how to find you will be in the show notes, but is there anything that you want to offer as a way to connect with you or as a last piece of wisdom, or yeah, what would you like to share with folks listening?
I want to share this card I just pulled for the audience. As you were
Mm.
talking, I was just shuffling the cards in the book that comes with the oracle card. So it's a whole box to set. There's a guidebook that I talk about my own story. I share what I shared with you in more detail, and I also teach people how to work with oracle cards. And then each card has its own page with a deeper meaning to it. One of the ways that I work with oracle cards is I just grab a deck and I just start shuffling them, and then one will pop out, one will slide out into my hand. So as you were asking that question, what would I like to leave the audience with, knowing that all my contact information will be down in the notes, is let's make space for child's heart.
Mm.
And so here's this, for those who are viewing it, this little wonky heart-shaped rock on the beach. And the message of this card is be patient and loving with your inner love child. Let her out to play at making love cards simply because it is fun. Be silly in love, allowing it to be the true expression of yourself.
Mm, that is beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing that. Yeah,
You're welcome.
I feel like I needed that message very
Mm.
specifically.
Yes, I
So
do. I feel like that was for me as well. I feel that today is a good day to go out and be playful and silly
Mhm.
because the sun, well, here the sun is shining in Victoria on the West Coast, and I've been working really hard, as I'm sure you have too. So,
Yeah.
permission to be silly and childlike today.
Perfect. Oh, thank you so much, Megan, for being here with us. And as I said, Woo Crew, all of the links will be below in the show notes to pick up a copy of that deck with your special Woo Crew discount, to connect with Megan on all of the social media platforms, and keep an eye peeled to Instagram. We're going to have that giveaway going where if you've listened to this episode, you enjoyed it, share about it on your stories, tag both of us, and you'll be entered in a draw to win a copy of that beautiful deck so you can hold that child's heart card in your very own hands. And as always, please leave a rating, a review if you like this episode, and tell your friends. Thank you for joining us, Megan.
Thank you so much for having me. I've thoroughly enjoyed my time with you.
Excellent. So, and for Woo Crew listeners, I'll be back again this time next week with, I don't know, maybe it's another guest or a solo episode. I have no idea right now, but I'll be here. Bye for now.